All right, well, it's good. It's 3 o'clock. We're all present and accounted for. And so I'll call the meeting to order. And we're here merely to approve the last meeting's minutes. Try saying that 3 times fast. And reviewing what the staff has been dealing with respect to rates out of the retirement system. And so I'll ask for approval of the agenda or adoption of the agenda as presented. Any objections? Seeing none, let's proceed. I don't see any member of the public, so I think we are okay to go to approval of the minutes. Are there any? Now we all, I think, I'm not mistaken, I think the board just received all of this afternoon, and so we can be forgiven if we haven't gone over them piecemeal. But that said, are there any thoughts or requests or questions regarding the minutes of the last meeting?
I would just, thanks, Joel. I would just request, Bobby Joe, if the motion passes unanimously, if you could indicate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Actually,
All of them were, right?
Bobby Joe, forgive me if I don't have this right, but my understanding has been for some time now that if a vote is not unanimous, it will be the votes will be recorded as how we vote individually. But otherwise, the assumption is the norm is that a vote noted as simply passing will have been by consensus. Is that right? I'm sorry, I haven't been talking much today. See if we can put these words
And Joel, that's fine by me. I mean, I assumed it, right? But I think
good. I mean, it wasn't always that way, Mike. I think your question was well placed, especially for the new kid on the block. I really do. I think.
Thank you. But for me, it's more about other people reading the minutes. Hey, what happened, right? And so that's why I want to make sure it's.
Yeah, I'd be perfectly okay if we move to a recording of all votes as unanimous, and then those that aren't also being noted by roll call.
And if people could just
Joe, if that's not a big deal, or perhaps at the top of the minutes you could note that any vote recorded here as having passed was by consensus, and then you don't have to repeat the same phrasing throughout the minutes. But
so I would just ask that if anybody is just not voting or abstaining, just let me know.
Right. Okay. Yeah. All right. That being said, is there a motion to approve the minutes from the May 20? I forget. May 24th meeting?
Moved.
Seconded.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any oppositions? That would be you, Gio, because you're the only one we can't see. Hearing none and seeing none, we've approved the minutes by consensus. And now we move on to the meat of this meeting.
I'm losing Joel. Is anyone else? You were.
No, it's good for me.
Oh, you could hear Joel, okay?
Yeah, so far.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll speak up a little bit.
Oh no, Joel. My system was just you were dragging on my system.
Well, in that case, I can't do anything to help you. Okay. All right. Well, let's move on with the objective here of adhering to the 30 minutes that are allocated for this, but with an understanding that Tracy's got to be gone by 4 o'clock. And we might as well do this as a full group if we can. Okay, so I guess I yield the floor to whichever of you, Mark or Bobby Joe, or is John actually with us?
I'm going to defer to my colleague Bobby Joe, who can pull these numbers out of her sleep if she has to.
All right, well, good thing.
I was on vacation last week, so I might be a little rusty, but.
Well, here's the thing. They're all so small that we won't know if you're wrong.
That's right.
Yeah, Bobby Joe, you can make them up. They won't.
I'll just make them up. No, we did. So as you know, Visters has always been on a fiscal year with the actives. And since VBA, since the over 65 group moved to VBA for January 1st, they wanted to get those two renewals synced up. So this is the first time we're doing a calendar year renewal for the under 65 groups. Hang on just one moment. I have preteens playing games next to me.
Yes, actually, the first time in 20 years with Visitors that we will be doing a calendar year renewal. It's a first. And you may recall that we had to do some fancy footwork with contract negotiations last year in order to sort of line this up. Okay, Bobby Joe, I filled in your absence. Go ahead.
Sorry about
Very,
that.
very adequately, almost adequately.
So, so this is the first year. So last year we had to do a quick 6-month renewal to close that final year. And then this is our first full year renewal that we're doing with Visitors in a calendar year. So the plan was to file for June 30th in order to have the rates approved, hopefully by October 1st. The problem is that DFR, the Department of Financial Regulation, let Blue Cross know that if they filed on June 30th, that was fine, but they would object the line because hospital budgets had not been submitted yet. And DFR wanted as close to final hospital budgets as possible. Now, you may recall in the past for our fiscal year, we normally have the budgets submitted around July 1st, and then around mid to late September, we get the approved hospital budgets. But DFR wants the actual hospital budgets that were submitted, even though they're not approved, to be within the renewal. So, Blue Cross used the same rating assumptions that they did for the QHP renewal. Was it 12%, Mark?
Yes, that's my recollection. Yep.
Yeah, so they're assuming a 12% increase on hospital budgets, but
Yeah.
They could be a lot higher than that. Based on, you recall from the last conversation we had, hospital budgets hospitals requested a mid-year increase. They got a much smaller increase than they had asked for. So we're suspecting that not only will they ask for a higher increase for their next upcoming fiscal year, but to try to make up for some of that deficit in their, from what they're telling us.
So last year's rejection becomes next year's outsized increase. Is that the idea?
Yes,
Yeah.
and whether or not the full amount will be approved, we don't know, but DFR wants that rating
All right.
included in there. So what our plan is to take the rates that we've received today, which are in general better than they have been. You may recall in the last few years, they've been upwards in the 30% range, 30–35%. And we've been kind of playing this, having to adjust the rates so that the actual retirees aren't feeling the full brunt of that increase. And Visitors has been doing some subsidization in that respect. This year, it's close enough that they think they want to just go with the pro forma rates, which is a big change from where it's been. So in the last year, we've been billing them a subsidy fee, the difference between the pro forma rates, which is what Blue Cross says they should be, and their billed rates, which is the most that Visitors is willing to put on their people. So they think at this point that they're able to take on that full amount. The problem is we don't know what that variable will be with the new hospital budgets. It could increase their rates a percentage. It could even, I mean, it could be upwards of 5%. We really don't know. We've asked Blue Cross, and Blue Cross really is not sure either at this point. So, basically what we're asking is approval of the rates as they are, as they're going to be submitted on the 30th, understanding that once the hospital budgets are passed, or excuse me, are submitted, that Blue Cross will have to update their filing and resubmit them. What Visitors has approval for today is to move forward with the rates as pro forma rates for the first time. But that could potentially change depending on the size of the increase.
Bobby, forgive me. Pro forma in this context means precisely what? Whose rate?
That's the rate that Blue
Whose
Cross
number?
says that they should be. That is the rates according to Blue Cross, that's the rate that they should be at.
Based-
versus
The actuaries come in and they say to us, okay,
It's the actuarial rate.
here's the
Okay.
rate that we think you should be paying to make all your bills.
Based on,
Claims,
based on experience and everything else that actuaries do. Okay.
And then with Vistas, and this is obviously available to us as well for actives, depending on our reserve state, we can say, well, thank you for the pro forma rate, but we don't want to charge that much. We'd prefer to charge less. And because of this weird, as Bobby Joe pointed out, this weird
year,
subsidization dynamic
Yeah.
between the Medicare population and the non-Medicare population. Last year, as Bobby Joe said, the actuaries came in and said, you need more than 30% for your under 65s. And Vista said, no, we
I
are
see.
doing that. So we're going to subsidize that rate. We're going to only charge 17% and change, and we will pick up the difference in this subsidization dynamic. It was still a high rate increase, but it was certainly less painful than 30% plus would have been. And that's the dynamic that's been in play now for a number of years. And as Bobby Joe said, we think Vistas would really like finally to end that subsidization beginning this year. And they might be able to do it with the numbers. However, that hospital budget is the unknown.
Okay, well, one more piece of this is Vistas isn't doing this entirely out of the concern for the pre-Medicare folks. Or
What do
it's
you mean?
doing it because it foots 80% of the bill, right?
Right. Vistas has obviously got the biggest premium.
Okay, so this is one sort of tentacle of state government adversely affecting the capacity of another tentacle of state government to pay its own way.
I
All
mean,
right.
whatever happens this year with Vistas in the under 65 population, it is going to be another large increase this year.
Yeah.
But it
Okay.
will not, but that pro forma to build comparison is going to be less severe than it's been in recent years. And like, again, one more time, those hospital budgets are the wild card in all of this.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And we can show you what those exhibits look like if you would like to see them, comparing pro forma to pro forma versus build to pro forma. That might be helpful to see.
I was
If
gonna
it's
ask, could
Go
you
Teresa.
take us, could you walk us, especially for the newer people, walk us through
Sure.
what you're actually asking for in terms of rates, what that means in terms of an increase? And then I am still not entirely clear about what you're asking us to do in terms of the hospital and the need to
That's the
almost
second
refund.
part of this discussion that we'll get to.
Okay.
All right, so I'll go ahead and
You
share
want
my
us to
screen.
approve-
I'm sorry, Trace?
I just want to be sure I understand what you want us, how you want us to approve
Got it.
Okay.
whatever you want.
Go,
Yeah.
Bobby. Joe,
Oops. Second.
we're gonna lose you here, right? All right.
Okay, I think you can see it now.
Yep, we can see.
Sorry, I'm just closing all these. I
Ooh,
kept trying, I was
ooh,
having a hard time.
Gartner Magic Quadrant. You just got me excited. Yeah, this is my
Yeah.
life.
I'm sorry, Mike. Mike,
It's good to know this about you, Mike.
Mike, the chair hadn't recognized you.
Okay, so looking at this display, this shows you the pro forma rates that could have been effective this July. So for 7/1 versus the rates that are going into effect or could go into effect for 1/1/2023. So if you look at the rates, you'll see that these rate increases are 0.7, 2.4, 2.1. They're very low. And so what these rates indicate is that if they took Blue Cross's pro forma rates as the actuaries say they should be, this is what their rate increase would be for January 1st. But because of that dynamic, that subsidy dynamic, and Vistas took on a portion of that in order to not put it on to their members, they have a higher increase than what the pro forma to pro forma would be. So again, if they had billed as they could have, the actuaries wanted them to be for 7/1, these actually would have been an overall increase of 2.3. So they had, this is a good year for them. This is the build rates
Oh, okay.
to the pro forma rates. So that here you'll see that it goes from an overall of 2.3 to an overall of 15.9. Still, it's a lot better than the 34 that we've seen in the past, but these are still some fairly high increases. But what Visters is hoping to do is to just absorb the full pro forma this year and do away with the subsidy dynamic that's in play. So these rates, they average about 16, 18 down in the Vermont Health Partnership, and the J plan is about 5.7. The Visters 65 is the 9.8. So
the total, why is the total 15? Oh, I see, because of
that's
the,
the overall,
the-
the average overall,
okay.
Oh,
and it is
so
weighted.
can I ask some clarifying questions?
Go ahead.
So to start, the margin-free pro forma rates, margin-free is the way of saying the rate of increase, the rates without a subsidy. Is that correct? So,
I think when they're referring to margin here, they're actually referring to there's no margin built in there for VHI.
oh, okay.
Nothing added to our reserves.
Right.
Okay. So build rates.
Oh, boy. Okay.
All right.
There
So
hasn't
and
been.
Right.
the rates listed monthly total payment for premiums, irrespective of who pays it. So when I look at, there's, the first one is comprehensive, 300 deductible, single plans, 309 people. The 7/1/2022 rate is $1,223.60.
Should be.
Is that what that says? And it will be increasing 15.5. It should increase according to the actuaries, 15.5% to $1,413.33, unless we want to add a margin to rebuild reserves or subsidize or something like that. Am I reading this right?
You can take the reserve issue off the table. That's not,
Okay.
for this conversation,
you're
it's
right.
not relevant. It's just
Yeah.
that subsidization dynamic.
Right.
So a person may have been paying 80% of that 1223 is now going to pay 80% of the 1443, but that 1223 wasn't the full rate. Visters was actually picking up an additional amount kind of behind the scenes sort of.
And so,
To avoid sticker shock for this group of its.
Yes, that's correct.
But it's am I right? Is that, well, who's paying who was paying the balance? It wasn't allocated to the other retirees. It came out of it probably came out of the corpus of the retirement funds.
Yes, it would have come out of the corpus of the
All right.
fund.
Okay, thank you.
so a two-person comp 300 plan for a pre-Medicaid retiree is going to be almost $34,000 a year.
Yes,
Just checking.
Almost before.
yes,
Okay,
these premium,
thank you.
yes.
And the retirees are picking up 20% of that.
Correct.
Correct.
Plus, which will feel steeper because of the increase, because for the first time, they're gonna not be subsidized.
Right. So, but in, if we look at last year, they had a 17% increase and were subsidized. This year, they'll get a 17% increase and not be subsidized. So it doesn't really, they didn't really know that they were being subsidized. I don't think.
I did.
You might have known.
You're on the inside, Tracy. You got the secret.
I know.
And by the way, the great majority of these folks are paying 20%, but there are some retirees who are paying more because of the 2010 retirement negotiations and the different premium rates pegged to vested experience. But
Right.
you're right, in general, most are 20%.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
Uh,
thank you.
So the piece that could change is with the new margin-free pro forma rates could potentially be higher because of hospital budgets. We don't know what those will look like. And we don't know what Visters will want to do when they see those amounts. We don't know if they're planning to accept it, whether it's 1% or 5%, or if they have another strategy in mind. But I think what Mark was alluding to earlier is us being able to have the flexibility to move forward and have the sign, an update and the amendment, or it's technically an objection from DFR, and update the filing once we know what that is and once Visters makes their determination.
Barring any unusual request from Visters, once they settle on the numbers, they are what they are. We don't have any more sort of role in it. So that brings us to, as Tracy alluded to a moment ago, allowing the management team, if you're inclined, to have the flexibility to move forward with this process once we have a better sense, along with Visters, of how the hospital budgets are going to sugar out.
Mike,
I want to come back to that, Mark, the hospital budget, but I just want to make sure I understand the term pro forma. I'm used to being it used in a certain way.
Yeah.
Are we using it to say
is it
these
pro-
are the rates that the adjusters, not the adjusters, the actuaries came up with?
Yes.
Okay.
All of
Okay.
this work is actuarially grounded to a particular methodology at Blue Cross. And, honestly, Mike, I've always, as a former Latin student, I've always found the words pro forma in an
this
actuarial complex
Just
just to be bizarre. But
Definitely.
nonetheless, that's how they talk. So,
Okay. So, right. So that was my second question. This is the actuary saying these are the pro forma rates. That's how they describe it.
that is correct. It's their
Okay.
lexicon.
Okay, good.
We're
Pro
playing in
forma.
their sandbox.
I understand now. So the numbers say this, which I agree with you, Mark. That's not pro forma.
Yeah, we could argue about that, but we need an actuary in the room for it.
Right. Okay. So then the hospital budgets, I want to make sure I understand what you're asking. You're asking us to approve these rates. If the hospitals come back and they jack up their rates, you're what are you asking the board to
Right.
do?
Right. That's the next part of the conversation. So if indeed the hospital budgets go up, and they are going to go up, there's no question to that.
Yeah.
It's just a question of how much. Then, as Bobby Joe said, Visters has to make a decision. They got to decide whether they're just going to swallow it all this year and be done with the subsidization, or whether they're going to continue to subsidize to some degree. And as I said a moment ago, unless they come back and ask something of us that we're not anticipating, that would require another board conversation, once Visters settles on how it's going to deal with those hospital budgets and its impact on subsidization, then for us, it's just a question of pushing these numbers through the system and setting them up for the renewal. There's really no more decision-making at our end. They have to make the decision. So to use that as a transition point, we'd like the flexibility as a management team to not have to call another board meeting post-hospital budget approval to move this process forward, unless, as I said, Visters come back and asking something of us that we as a management team couldn't possibly make a decision about, that would require board action. And we've got actually some language for you to consider
Okay.
to allow us that flexibility.
Some kind of percentage
Range.
of flexibility range.
Well, let me show you the language and see if it meets the test. Bobby Joe, can you
Okay. No, but that's good. I appreciate, now I understand a little better. But going back to what the last two pages, the real compare is the 2 pages, right? One is the, hey, here's what they did last year to subsidize, and the other one is, hey, here's what it's going to look like without a subsidy now, right? So,
Right.
and that's the year to year,
hospital budget.
right? So, right, without what we don't know.
Correct.
Is these increases, right, where they're no longer subsidizing? What's your take on what the population is, how they're going to react to a 15.9?
Well, again, remember with the hospital budgets, if we'll push that up, and if Visters decides just to if you will, rip the Band-Aid off and deal with this with no further subsidization, we could potentially be looking at anything from a 17 to a 20. Depending
what do you-
again on the hospital. And I think from what I heard last year, retirees weren't terribly happy about 17%. They're not going to be happy about 17 again, or higher. But again, that's Vista's call. And they'll deal with whatever fallout comes from that, from their
Okay.
members.
Well, let me be a little cynical. We don't have any say in this.
No, we do not.
I guess that's
At the
not
end of the day,
cynical.
we don't.
Yeah, that's the reality of this sort of decision making. Is like, what decision are we to make here?
Once upon a time, there was a lot of intersection between retirees and the actives. And
Right.
there's a wall between them now. So to your point, Joe, there really isn't much for us to do once Vistas makes a decision.
So,
Except just file the
yeah.
paper.
So every year for this group of retirees, we will be presented a fait accompli from Vistas to incorporate into our rate structure.
You
Yeah,
just
yeah.
wanted to use another Latin phrase. I get it, Joel.
You got it. At least for your benefit. Now I know I have to be on my toes around here, which I cannot translate into Latin. So, all right. All right. So we're looking at a 15.9%,
At the moment.
and we're supposed to say we approve of this. I mean, I'm not quite sure what the,
Can you explain how whatever action, how VSBIT, not VSBIT, VHI, sorry, is protected from exposure if the rates aren't set properly?
you mean if the hospitals are approved for a rate increase mid-year
Right.
and how it gets passed through? Yeah.
I think the important part is that we receive the pro forma rates. We need to receive the rates that are actuarially sound. So whether we get that full amount in the 80-20 split, or whether Vistas somehow still continues to subsidize a little bit over the next couple of years, it doesn't really matter to us, as long as we get the full pro forma rates. I do have to create a small admin bill once a month for the difference. It's not a heavy lift. It's not a problem for me to do, and I will continue to do that should they need us to do that. Joel, to your point, I'm hoping that this is, if they do move forward and, quote unquote, rip off the Band-Aid and be done with this, I don't think that subsidization will come up again. I think that'll be over.
Great.
Um,
And Tracy, to your point about exposure, the mid-year hospital increase or request for one, that is where we are exposed. Because we didn't build in a rate increase mid-year that we couldn't anticipate. And that's one of the problems we were looking at this year when 3 hospitals came in and requested large mid-year rate increases. 1 didn't get any, 2 did get a mid-year rate increase, but it was much lower than what they had wanted. And that will play out in the future somehow for us. And the actuaries will calculate that accordingly. One of the problems I think we're all looking at for both actives and retirees is that and again, I think Bobby Joe alluded to this, what the hospitals didn't get mid-year, we are expecting them to come back on the rebound and try to recoup.
Try again.
And I think Blue Cross expects that as well. And that generally seems to be the talk of the town for people who talk about this stuff. So it's just a question then of how much that's going to be.
But how do I understand how the larger pool works and how the risk works in that context. But my understanding is our deal with Vistas is a little different in that they pay what they need to pay to cover their health care expenses.
Right.
And they bear the risk if, just like VHI bears, but they bear the risk if there's an increase in healthcare expenses. They also get the gain if there's a decrease. What's in place to have them almost be their own separate pool and we just administer it? How are we protected from the impacts of this decision so that we're essentially turning it over to them and authorizing you to do whatever they want you to do? That's my question. And I know there's an answer, it's just I don't remember it.
So Bobby, Joe, how would you answer that?
I'm sorry, can you say it one more time? The piece that I'm sorry, it went
I'm
over my
still
head and I was
trying
hoping you
to
were gonna
get-
ask me.
Go,
The
Tracy.
question is whether Visitors is buying a fully insured product, or if they're bearing some risk.
Right, so they are not self-insured. We are
If this board says do whatever.
I'm sorry, I think my system keeps hooking up, but they continue to be a fully insured through us. So we do hold the risk. We have offered it to them a couple of times if they would like to go to be self-insured. And they have not taken us up on that, so.
Okay, so I have a lot to say about that then.
Boy.
And just prospectively will foreshadow that, of course, I would support your recommendation to approve the Vista's request for these rates and to give you discretion to adjust the rate filing per some sort of parameters that we agree on in the motion, which you're going to suggest to us. But particularly since the larger pool bears the risk, and given the cost of these premiums, and understanding that, as Mark said a few minutes ago, we have insight that most other people don't, and in that way have capacity to focus in a way that perhaps even the treasurer doesn't have to focus, that I think it's incumbent on us to advocate or inform Visitors about, our thoughts about other options, like, given we're talking about $34,000 for a two-person plan, in our main plans, retirees, even if the out-of-pocket was nearly, was subsidized up to $300, you could be saving $10,000 per retiree, and the retiree contributions could be significantly lower too. We're talking about millions of dollars in savings, and maybe in the context of hundreds of millions of dollars in healthcare costs for retirees, that's not enough. But for retirees, the retiree contribution could be lower, and millions of dollars is millions of dollars. I know it's not our decision, but we have insight that Visitors doesn't, and the ability to focus. And I would like to advocate that they look at another option.
I have a
Lisa?
question. Yeah, I have a question. I'm not quite sure I understand how, if you throw it, maybe I'm not clear on this, but it sounds to me like you want Visitors to assume responsibility for insuring retirees separate from VHI.
It's not
Number
so
one.
much that they're separate from VHI. For several years after Visitors joined the pool, which I think was around, I want to say 2001, 2002, maybe it was a little sooner than that, but
Turn of the century.
yeah. So what we eventually discovered through actuarial analysis, and Joe Zimmerman and I were a party to this, is that initially the actives were subsidizing the retirees.
Yeah, right.
Then we discovered,
Initially,
initially, and
That's
then
the
we
point, right.
discovered in this new century that Visitors was subsidizing the actives. And that started this conversation that eventually led DFR to say, the actives are not going to subsidize the retirees, and the retirees are not going to subsidize the actives. You folks have to draw this wall between these two populations. You're one pool, but we're not going to allow actives to subsidize the retirees or vice versa. And so then we began this process of arriving at pro forma and build rates that eliminated any sort of cross subsidization between actives and the retired population. And so Visitors then just had to focus on how it dealt with the subsidization between the
Within their
Medicare
own, right.
and the under 65s. And so it's a little hard. It seems counterintuitive. We're one pool, but when we talk about this, it's almost as though we're talking about two pools, but we aren't. We're talking about how the subsidization dynamic is confined now within Visitors, given that historical trajectory of rate increases, rather than being slopping over into the active population or vice versa. I hope that's helpful.
It does. It just, maybe I'm totally off base, but it seems to me that we're talking about, there's an overlap with the negotiated agreements whereby teachers, and boards have decided that it's legitimate to retire, after X number of years, pretty much regardless of age. And so if something happens on the insurance front where you turn around and say, we're going to make it absolutely untenable for you to retire prior to 65, then you're engaging in a much broader negotiations. And the irony is, of course, that on one hand, you're pushing people out. I would argue, yes, legitimately, you're pushing people out of, the higher paying positions who've been in there for 30 some years. And then you're turning around and saying, yeah, but your insurance is too costly. And I guess I'm not talking just dollars and cents. I'm saying at some point, if you make a decision, if we or whoever it is makes a decision to increase it, beyond the path, whatever that may be, right? Beyond the pale, at some point, you're negotiating with dollars and cents rather than with actual language. Does that make sense? Or am I totally off base?
No, I think you're not off base. You're just thinking differently from the way Visters is and the Blues. And
Well,
for the most
I mean,
part,
I would think that that's kind of our job on some level
yeah.
as the, I mean, if, I don't know.
Oh, yeah, it's sort of indirect implications of what we're talking about.
Right.
That
Which are
wouldn't-
actually quite direct
that-
by the
right.
time, yeah.
And,
If you don't want people to retire before 65, then
So-
that has to be a legitimate discussion. Or you make it untenable for somebody to retire before they're 65.
right,
I don't know, just a
Yeah.
thought.
And if
that's a good
you
point.
can, you give them 3 plan changes instead of, or 2 plan changes.
You're frozen, Tracy, sorry.
Instead of 1. You go from the active slate of now. I'm going to turn off. I've turned off my video, hoping my audio is better.
Okay. You're
also-
frozen, but this face is the one you prefer. So,
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
It also means more plan transitions for retirees. You go from the active plans to the plans we used to have to post 65 Medicare plan, which is more confusing for retirees as well.
Yeah.
I didn't answer all the questions, so it's not for me to say it's okay.
But
Sorry, Mark.
it's an interesting and valid
This is an important
observation.
conversation.
One implication shy of that is a basic question that might help. If the hospital rates are increased in the middle of the year, what are the implications for VHI? What happens?
It'll drive up our premium rates.
It
And
will,
and it'll hit our reserves.
but
Yeah.
for this small group,
Right.
which is
Yeah, well, it'll have an impact on the under 65s, which is the smallest group in Visters
right.
by far. On the actives, that will also have some impact. And as Bobby Joe said, it'll be a question of how much of that we can absorb with our reserves and how much we feel we have to raise premium.
So as a practical matter, the rate setting for pre-Medicare teacher retirees is not done by us at all. We're the pass-through. Right? I mean, the fact that the premiums will go up if the hospital rates go up doesn't have, well, that's just the natural effect on the rates and that are set by Visters.
And Visters will make the final decision.
All right. Okay. Boy, I wish we had more time to talk stuff through like this. But we don't. So you guys say that I see a number that we're supposed to approve, but you say you have language that goes
Yeah, we
with
got
it.
some
to-
language
the
for you.
flexibility you need. Why
Those
don't
were
we-
the good
why don't we
numbers.
let's move on to that if it's all right with everybody. Okay, so this will be the form of a motion to come.
Mark, do you have that language handy? I'm trying to,
I think you've got it. I sent it to you. If you can't find it, let me know. I could probably dig it out again.
oh, here we go. I think I got it. Oh. so sorry. Sorry, just 1 second. I did not have that handy.
All right.
I do have it. Just gonna put it into a Word document.
Okay. While we're waiting, Peg, I assume school's out. You look a little more relaxed than usual.
No, we got done last Monday, so it's been a week, which is
Yeah,
nice.
oh, even better. All right.
Yeah, thanks.
That was, I move. Okay. I move that or approve the June 30th.
Oops. Looks like we lost Gio and he's coming back.
Okay. When he comes back. Okay, you'll explain the blank for the percentage.
Yeah.
It's blank.
Gio's back. Okay.
And so, yeah, so the flexibility language is the long last sentence, right?
That's right. Yeah. It's the brutally long last sentence. And abandon hope, all ye who read this sentence.
So Mark, Mark had drafted this language. I just,
Okay.
Mark, do we need to put the percentages in there? Because I don't think we have the average percentage for the under 65s.
We don't have that yet.
Well, we have it. We have the 3 different plans, but we don't have those 3 plans averaged. We have all
You know
4.
what? I actually think, Bobby Joe, we probably don't actually need it for this purpose. What we're asking in that first sentence is that there's 2 parts to this. Obviously, the first part is that we're going to file the pro forma rates on June 30th, as approved by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont, and obviously endorsed by the trustees of Visitors. They've already said to us they're moving forward with that. And then, as Joel noted in that second and tortured sentence, additionally, if the Department of Financial Regulation directs a reconsideration of Visitors' filed rates after the approval of 2023 hospital budgets by the Green Mountain Care Board, and if that necessitates an increase to Visitors' rates above the initial pro forma levels, the board authorizes the VHI management team to finalize any rate increase for both populations of retirees in consultation with Visitors. So the first part of this sentence is we're authorized with Visitors to file on June 30th with the pro forma rates that we now have in our possession that were determined by Blue Cross. Subsequently, if the Green Mountain Care Board approves hospital budget, they will definitely approve hospital budgets. And when they do that, if that raises those pro forma rates, and Visitors, then the management team and Visitors will work together to just finalize the numbers. Because as we've said during this conversation, we don't have any control over those numbers. Visitors will determine what they are after the Green Mountain Care Board and the actuaries of Blue Cross take a really hard look at what those new hospital budgets are going to be.
Okay, all right.
Mark, I do have to just correct one thing. So I'm going to take out this portion about the
Tracy, I
percent.
see your hand up, so hold on. Okay, Bobby, go ahead. Bobby Joe, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that it's not the approval of the budgets, it's actually the filing of the budgets. We won't have the
Thank you.
approved, we won't have the approved hospital budgets until deep into September. So it'll be the filed.
That's a good distinction. Please make that correction.
And so, and the filing date deadline is what? Do you know?
Oops. They'll be filing July 1st,
They will. Okay. I thought that. I want to make sure.
Friday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joe, it's if the VHI board approves the filing on June 30th of the pro forma rates. Is that what you were getting at?
I was referring to,
Oh, boy. Okay.
right
No,
here.
I'm sorry. I get it. I'm sorry. I get it now.
Yeah, the approval. Yeah.
Got it.
Tracy.
So my question is back to the process for finalizing agreement about a rate increase after hospital budgets.
Mhm.
Do we need to say something along the lines of, I mean, Visitors, you've always made sure Visitors bore responsibility for the increased cost in a reasonable way, and that risk wasn't on, and it can't be on the larger pool. And maybe that's all that needs to be said. We know that DFR won't allow the rates to be subsidized by VHI.
That's right. Yeah, that's well established. We're safe
Okay,
there.
so nothing else needs to be said because of that. And I guess it's important that everybody on the board understand that we can't file, well, we can file rates that DFR won't approve, but ultimately they have to be approved, and it doesn't allow for subsidization. DFR doesn't allow for subsidization.
Correct. So Bobby, Joe, do you want, I think you get rid of that second yellow section as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I was going to put in the overall increase of 15.9. Does that work? Just so we are always
That's fine.
clear.
Yeah, that's fine. Good, thank you. So why doesn't everybody take another hard look at this and just pause and read through it one more time, make sure it's clear to you now that we've made some edits to it.
So I have I guess it's a request or question about the second phrase. So I understand that what you're asking for. Should there be some kind of threshold within which you guys can operate, right? So I don't think that we should be giving you the freedom to act, who knows what's going to happen, but shouldn't we, as a governance board, saying within, a certain range?
I think that would be, again, if I understand your question, I think that would be appropriate if we had any real control over the numbers. And we don't. Like, we won't determine what the range of increase would be after the hospital budgets are approved.
All right, so I'll say it this way. If the hospital budgets get approved and it means a 30% increase across the board, I would want that to come back to the board, and I want us to have a discussion about that. Even if you say there's nothing we can do, I think that's still, there's a certain threshold at which I think the board needs to be involved again.
I was going to make that same point, but I was going to use the phrase carte blanche. But that's for Mike's benefit. That's never mind. But thank you. All right. I wanted that acknowledgement. In any event, I want the board to know that I personally agree with that. I don't quite know what level of discretion what limit to place on, not discretion's the wrong, on the staff's decision making on this, but there's got to be something. Otherwise, we're going to feel potentially, we're going to feel possibly irresponsible today, and likely irresponsible if the rate is so high that it's just beyond what we have been contemplating sitting here.
Well, and it would be fair to say also that the hospitals could request a 30% increase, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Blue Cross would put that into the filing. So
I understand. Yeah.
What do you think, Mark?
Wow.
I'm happy with any, number the board's comfortable with. What I'm struggling with is, let's say the hospital budgets really just blow everything out of the water.
Right.
This just comes back and says you know what? We are going to rip the Band-Aid off this year. The hospital budgets have just raised our increase from 15 to 30, and we're going to impose 30%. They can do that without our blessing, right? So what that would mean, though, is that
Boy.
so we as a board then could come back and say, we don't think that's responsible, or we think that's too high. The only way to bring that number down is for Visitors to find another revenue stream.
Right, but that's a discussion I think that we can have board to
Yes.
board, right?
Yes.
And say, we're not comfortable with the decision you made. Let's have a conversation about it.
Yes, exactly. Just as long as we're all aware that that conversation then is going to compel Visitors to look to us to help bring down the cost of that 30%. And that's the conversation we'd be having,
Okay.
which would also implicate DFR down the road as well, because it would probably inevitably involve talking about our reserves, right? So I'm fine with having that conversation, just as long as we all know that that would be the nature of the conversation.
Yeah, and I hear you that the probability of making a change is low, but I would still say I would want to take that on as a board, that we're going to decide what to do when we get this outrageous news.
Well,
So
that's fine. So here's a recommendation: is that when we were having a conversation with Blue Cross, Visitors said, and Bobby Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, John, you know, it could be this amount, or it could be 5% above your pro forma. 15 could be 20. And, you know, that was a sobering moment in the conversation, as you can imagine. I don't think anybody at Visitors, actually even me, I didn't think I was thinking as high as a 5% above the pro forma. So what if we said, if the pro forma rate increase for the under 65 population is greater than 20%, then this overall increase,
Oh, yeah.
then this conversation would come back to the VI board. I mean, it could be
Just
another
to be
year.
clear, Mark, that's 4% because we're at 15.9.
Okay. Okay, so it could be 21. That's fine. We could take Paul Schultz, the actuary's 5% figure that he threw out in the conversation. So it could be 21% or 20, whatever you're comfortable with as a board.
So what if that last line read more or less to finalize any rate increase not to exceed 4%? Would that do it simply? I know, Bobby Joe, you're typing away too, but
That's okay. Do we want to say 4 or 5?
well, 15 point, you said 4.
No,
Tracy
4
says, Tracy says
says
5. I don't think we need, I think you're saying 5 and not asking to say anything. I don't think we're going to get lost in a debate over whether it's 4 or 5. So why don't we make it 5? Right?
just because that's what Paul gave us as a,
Oh,
That was like one of his worst case scenario.
okay. I must have not listened to that carefully enough. Okay.
I don't think I
That-
expressed it clearly.
Does that work for the staff? It works initially, and then are there other thoughts regarding this motion? Did we have them? Is there a maker of the motion yet?
does that work?
I really don't want to make the motion, but for expediency.
Tracy makes the motion. Thank you.
you will do it.
Second it.
And Lisa's a second. And if I had to suggest anything, we're all reluctant, and I'm taking advantage of my role as chair to ask for it and not offer it myself. Are there any further discussion? All those I want to say not favor. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising your hands.
Aye.
Any objections? Any abstentions? Seeing none, we have adopted the motion as amended, or the motion as actually presented. Okay, thank you all very much. It's 3:55. Tracy? Or you just say, you just like the number 5 so much you keep raising?
No, I definitely would like to do what, if there's an interest among other board members and management team, I would definitely like to be intentional about initiating a conversation with VSBIT about how we can take better care of pre-Medicare retirees and at least actively explore options, which may not be simple, but I would still like to initiate that. I think it may be hard work, but it's a win-win.
Well, I appreciate the thought. I also recognize the difficulties associated with it and the fact that we have, in fact, I presume, been heavily engaged in that sort of discussion with VSBIT. But boy, to have rate increases like this outsized with us having virtually no say in it whatsoever is very difficult to swallow as a board. So do we need a motion, or will we just sort of authorize the staff to come up with a proposed approach to VSBIT that is somehow different from what we've done? It's,
I think it might be helpful for me as a trust administrator if we as a board and the staff could talk this through a little bit more to be a little clearer about what we actually mean by this.
Yeah.
I mean, periodically, VSBIT does raise. In fact, Steve May brought this up at the last meeting. Well, what if we started looking at some new benefit designs? So this issue has come up periodically in the last few years,
yeah.
but it has never actually taken any real definitive shape or direction, because frankly, VSBIT has not sort of picked up the conversation and kept moving with it, and it is their obligation. And I think for us to participate in any conversation like that, we as a board and a staff should be clearer about what we actually mean about this, because I'm not clear, frankly.
Well, it does seem to me that a discussion like this ought to follow pretty quickly on what we've done today, so that we don't lose track of it. And in particular, the point raised by Lisa earlier about the indirect or the almost indirect implications for decisions that active teachers make about whether to retire or not. All right. So with that in mind, as an item for the I'm not sure what's going.
Sorry, Tracy, we lost you again.
Yeah, okay.
I was trying to say I'm comfortable with it being on a future agenda, and I'm happy to work on kind of a framework for discussion if that would be helpful, Mark.
Sure, that would be fine. Happy to have that conversation. Oh,
Here's a
our
little note.
newest board member just joined us. There you go.
When are you going to retire? Well, look, it's 3:58. We'll find, Tracy and I will find with the staff the proper wording for this agenda item, but I think we should include it on the next meeting agenda. Yeah, as much as I think of other items as of significance, this is actually relevant to the people we're representing in a very direct way. All right, that being said, I'm looking around, it's 3:59, Tracy's about to leave, and I think the rest of us are as well. And so in the name of efficiency for a change, I think we shall call the meeting adjourned at 3:59, and we'll schedule another meeting and we'll be in touch. Have a great summer.
Thanks for bearing with us, folks, through all that. Appreciate it.
Very well done. Very tough.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Take care.